Good evening. It's Thursday night, and welcome to the panel. Mr. Shamari Scott is an example of a young professional and progressive Caymanian that we have been talking about in recent editions of the panel. Currently, the Chief Business Officer for Health City, Cayman Islands, Mr. Scott will also be the next president of the Cayman Islands Chamber of Commerce. His first job after graduating was with the Cayman Islands Department of Tourism for 18 years. In 2013, he was presented with the Young Caymanian Leadership Award. Shamari presently serves on the board of the governors of the University College of the Cayman Islands, where he's a deputy chair. He also sits on the Civil Service Complaints Commission and is a chair of the Social Services and Healthcare Network for the Strategic Economic Advisory Group. Shamari exemplifies the best of Cayman, and we are so proud to have him on the panel. Good night, Shamari, and welcome to the panel.
Good night, and thank you for having me, both you gentlemen. And I need to update my bio because I'm no longer deputy chair at UCCI. Swap that position out, so I'm actually chair of the Education Council now. But they had to pry it from my arms because it was near and dear to my heart. But you.
Well, thank you very much. You have a lot of hats to fill, I must say. All right, I want to say good night to Mr. Mario Banks. Mario, welcome back.
Thank you. Good evening, and good to have Shamari on as well. And our regular panelist, Dr. Roy Bodden, is at another function, another engagement. I think is a cultural engagement, so he can't be here tonight, but he'll be here next week, God's willing. Yes. Okay. But great to have Shamari.
I agree. Before we start tonight's conversation with Shamari, I invite our listeners and viewers to like Cayman Times Facebook page and also share the live with your contacts. Now down to business. Shamari, can you provide us, please, with an update on Health City's preparedness to support the country's hospital needs as we inch towards reopening the borders?
Well, that's definitely something that I would be pleased to actually speak about. Just briefly, obviously, Health City was at the front of the COVID pandemic back in February. It seems so long ago now, February 2020. The first positive case in the Cayman Islands would have been off a cruise ship that actually the patient presented to us with cardiac issues. And then we later, came to know that the patient had COVID-19. And we did what everybody else did at that point in time is, we contained the issue, closed the hospital, made that tough, hard decision to close the hospital in order to contain the virus. And we saw that the country, close to a month later, also did the same thing in order to contain the virus within our shores and to stop the virus from outside coming in as well. Since that point in time, at every point, Health City has tried to lend a helpful arm. So as soon as we were able to get back up and running, even a month later, there was supply chain issues and shortages with PPEs. And we have to remember this was at the front end. There was no vaccine. Everybody was really on pins and needles. And the actual spacesuit, as we would call it, which is the full PPEs that medical professionals would need if we reached a point when there were people in hospitals with serious COVID illnesses. The government was having a little bit of an issue through their regular distribution channels. And Health City jumped in and we worked our channels and we were able to get 30,000 PPE suits and the such into the Cayman Islands. And since then, we've been helping with PCR. And now that the borders are ready to be reopened, we stand ready in that we have more than half of the ventilators on island. With Health City, we have an ICU. We have the actual ventilated beds as well that would be able to help. We have a COVID ward of 47 beds if needed. Hopefully, hard on chest, we won't need it. Yes. We also have ECMO machines, which, we can take the function of breathing off their lungs and still keep them alive in order to help them to revive. And we have a host of qualified staff that will be able to help in case it's needed. So we're working very closely with the HSA and obviously public health. And as we stand today, praise be to God, there's nobody on ventilator. But if we were to ever get to a stage where HSA needed to have additional resources, we're more than willing and prepared. And there's also the cocktail that persons are aware of that help if you get the disease, and Health City will actually have that on island and in stock within the next week to 2 weeks, just in case we were to get to that level as well.
Thank you for that refresher, memory refresher. It's welcoming news, particularly now when we've seen the community spread really take off. And up to today, we had over 126 new cases reported. And of course, we're heading towards opening the borders, and everyone's wondering what would happen at that point in time. And here at the panel, our concern was basically, do we have the facilities? We now have 11 admitted to the hospital, and the numbers don't lie. And as the numbers increase, the chances of having more people admitted to hospital may happen. And so having other facilities on the island at your level is really, really beneficial to the country. No one saw COVID coming. So,
Yeah.
It's a good thing that we do have another hospital here ready to face the music, as we say.
And the great thing about having a network of hospitals in India, for instance, 40 hospitals and embedded units, is that our counterparts in India have seen everything, right? They were at the front, center, and middle when cases were low, when cases were huge, when people were in hospitals, when hospitals were being overwhelmed, when they had to actually put people on ventilator, when oxygen was at a premium. They've seen everything. So we have the benefit of other medical professionals that are partners, obviously, with Health City, who have seen everything to even help us further be prepared for what potentially could come. However, obviously, with a high vaccination rate, the majority of our population did what the medical professionals were asking of them. So we probably are in the best position of any country to be able to deal with COVID at this point in time and minimize death as well as hospitalizations. And Ralph, just to mention the hospitalizations that you stated, what I also would like to mention is that I heard Dr. Lee speaking. It was one of his video broadcasts, where he also said that at that time it was 4 of the 8, if this were in other jurisdictions, wouldn't have been hospitalized, right?
Okay.
So it's really 4 or 5 that are hospitalized by your regular type of scenario.
Right.
And the good news is, even though they're hospitalized, I think there's only 1 that needs the aid of oxygen presently, and nobody's on ventilator, which anybody in hospital isn't a good thing, but the fact that people haven't reached that level at this point in time is definitely a good thing.
Okay, very good. Mario, anything to add?
Yeah, So you say you got 47 COVID beds in your COVID ward, Shamari. Any idea how you can remind us, HSA, how many they have, like, ventilation or ventilated beds, and do you know the figures for the doctor's hospital?
So Doctors Hospital, unfortunately, doesn't have an ICU. So they wouldn't have the tertiary level of care that we would have when it comes to those types of COVID patients that would need to be ventilated. So at present, I couldn't give you the exact numbers for the Health Services Authority, but I know that they would have, from a ventilator perspective, the country has approximately 42 ventilators. Hospital beds that you can get oxygen to be aided, I'm sure they would have upwards of 50 or 60, but I would have to get those numbers for you. And also remember that there was also supposed to be a field hospital,
right,
that they had already done the full run through. And if memory, and nowadays with these gray hairs, memory doesn't always treat me well, but if memory treats me well, I think it was between 80 and 100 beds that they were going to have in that hospital, the field hospital,
yes.
which wouldn't necessarily have ventilation, but they would have the ability to give oxygen, aided oxygen, which is like that next level of preparedness. So all in all, as we know in this COVID battle, your vaccination rates were your first defense mechanism. And if memory serves me right, the percentage of our population over the age of 8 that's vaccinated is 90%, right? And the way a gentleman explained it to me early days when I was really struggling with how it was going to help. and especially when vaccinated people, even though at a lesser extent, can still get COVID, especially Delta. And he said, all right, think about it this way, that you have a room of dry timber. And if you set a match ablaze in that room, if you have 10 logs of dry timber, they're all going to catch on fire. But if in a room you have 8 logs that are wet logs and only 2 logs that are dry timber, it won't burn its way through that room to get to the other areas of dry logs. So our first protection really is the vaccination. And then on top of that, the mask wearing, obviously the hand hygiene that we got away from, all of that will help to add additional layers that we should be, we're probably in the best case scenario for those persons who would get ill to the point to need ventilator and the such.
So that field hospital was installed, as I remember, in last year, and it was all ready to go. Fearing the worst, and then was it disassembled, or was it just what happened to that? Because I thought it was all ready to go again, but I mean, you mentioned it's available, but
right. So my understanding is they probably would have been able to set that up to, one, understand the time it takes in order to put that together and to make sure you have all of the different components and parts. I'm not sure if they've reached a level where they have assembled it again, but I know it's a part of the plan. Okay. So if and when they reach their certain trigger points, they'll be able to put it together again and assemble it. And just like how we prepare for hurricanes, right, where you go and you test your generator, even though you're not putting it outside as yet, I am sure they have tested everything to make sure it's ready. So when it's time to jump into action, we definitely will be able to do that as the Cayman Islands.
So, Mark, do you know who's in charge of the whole reopening battle plan? Is there a leader that is what we call the SAR or the chairman or whatever? And I know that, in your intro, you were going to be Chamber of Commerce president in January. And I wonder if the Chamber of Commerce is involved, for example, on any kind of committee or task force or whatever that's looking at the reopening to make sure everybody is working together.
Definitely. So my understanding is there's the program board, which is obviously, not obviously, but it is the civil servants that lead the charge in the various areas. So you would have your airports, you would obviously have tourism, customs, obviously the medical component. And my understanding is that the deputy governor is the chairman of that program board, and each section of the program board would have their area to speak to industry. So you would have your medical component, which would have a Dr. Lee and or somebody like a Lizette that's in charge of HSA, or Dr. Williams with the public health, who would reach out to physicians in the physician community. You would have the chief officer for tourism, who would obviously reach out to CITA and other portions of industry. And we as the chamber and as a chamber council, the deputy governor did reach out to us to bring forth some of their plans and to get feedback from us as the chamber, as well as we would have had meetings with the premier and select members of his group in order to have presentations about various components of the plan and to garner feedback from us as well. So at points in time, we've been involved from a chamber's perspective with the program board and or the deputy governor and or the political arm. And even coming out of some of the items where we're touching base, one of the areas, and we as a chamber, as you would know, as a former president of chamber, Mr. Ebanks, is that we always want to be a part of the solution, right? So as an advocacy group, if you are only pointing out issues and you're only raising your voice, you might as well just be anybody else in the community that will throw stones. What the chamber has always prided itself on is obviously raising the tough issues, but putting forth solutions. And the solution that we are proud to be a part of is having a series of getting our employers ready for what living with COVID would be. So, for instance, it starts on November 12th, which is, once again, I think that's next week,
Yes,
or the week after. The days are running into each other.
that's next Friday.
Be an employer's guide next. There we go. Which
Next
be an
Friday.
employer's guide to applying for the government assistance. So, for instance, we know that isolation is going to be an issue, especially for the small businesses. So
Yes.
we would have heard that. We would have reached out to the government and said, listen, this is going to be an issue when people have used up their vacation, when people have no more sick days. And yes, we as employers will do as much as possible to work with our employees. But when you have a small business that has 5 employees or less, it becomes hard for the business owner in the most parts, which are also Caymanians, to be able to continue footing the bill, especially when you have businesses that haven't made the revenue over the past 2 years based on borders being closed. So that would be an example of one of the sessions that we're having. We're having best practices and protocols for COVID safety, just to remind people how to be safe. We have a course that's supporting employees in times of uncertainty. You being an HR professional, Mr. Ebanks would understand how important that is, because your most important asset is your people. And a lot of times the mental health issues that have, the ups and downs, right? We were like, a lot of people were like, no, we need borders to be open. We need borders to be open. And there was a certain type of mental issues that persons would have with not being able to make their salary, not being able to meet ends meet. And now, as we get closer to borders being open and you have positives popping up left, right, and center, there's another aspect in regards to your mental health with the fear of what's going to happen with COVID. So, for instance, we're also offering that. And what's interesting is, and something that I really would want to achieve during my tenure of chamber presidency, not only advocacy, but even more so communication. Just knowing that that's one of the skill sets that I studied in, and people say that I'm pretty good at, is explaining exactly who the chamber is, right? And I'm marketing guy, research guy, so I'm always data driven. And a lot of times when people hear the Chamber of Commerce, they think big business.
Yes,
And
yes.
people actually, when they understand that of the 632 companies that are actually registered chamber members, 73% are businesses that have under 20 employees.
Right.
40% are businesses that have under 5 employees.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's really small business that we are representing. So when you hear about the training that we're doing, when you hear about the advocacy, it's really on behalf of those businesses that wouldn't have a lot of admin staff, that wouldn't have a lot of revenues to bear a lot more pain when we reopen. And that's what we as the chamber are doing, advocating and making sure that the government can also meet us halfway to help businesses to reopen and stay open, even with isolation protocols and lateral flow tests and the such.
And I think that's one of the main
Just
reasons why Ralph invited you on here tonight, not just because you're a young, talented Caymanian with a great track record of marketing at the Department of Tourism and data, and also with Health City, but because you also are a good communicator, which is critical, And the question that I have for you in relation to the webinars that the Chamber of Commerce is doing with government, those are excellent. But if the majority of your members are small businesses, and many are very small micro businesses, a lot of them may not be into social media and webinars, or have time in the middle of the day to go on. I'm wondering whether you could advocate that some of these webinars, or all of them, be also either simulcasted on Radio Cayman or recorded and put there, so that these small people and mom and pop operations can actually listen to this very good stuff. Because one of the complaints that we have, even on the panel in the last 5 or 6 weeks, is that the communication plan and the use of Radio Cayman and some of the traditional media is really not happening as much. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that, but that's a suggestion that I would like to put forward.
Definitely. And I mean, the good news is that the actual attendance is usually very, very high. So a lot of at least the businesses that are chamber members, are able to access technology, and we are taping it, and we will be able to share it with the membership afterwards so that they can review back, they can go and see. But what you're mentioning is actually a point that I will take back, that at the end of the day, we just want to reach as many people as possible. So if it means also doing it on radio, then that's something that we'll look at. But we're also data driven. So when we do our surveys, and as such, we do get back a sizable portion of responses. And what we've been told thus far is that the webinars actually are helping our businesses, and people are listening in. And a lot of times, based on what we're offering, big business can afford to hire their own training department. So typically they aren't the ones that are using these resources. So they probably would come to us for some more of the other advocacy if it has to do with potential laws that are coming into place that they would like to have a voice within. But these trainings are really the place for small business. But definitely take your suggestion on board, and I will mention it and see how we can also get it through traditional media as well.
Yes, Shamaria, very good information. I have a question in regards to the types of businesses that are really hurting now. There's mention of the tourism-related business, and just today they launched a program that will help the business owners for transportation-related and actually businesses that are working in the tourism industry. Do you see other types of business in the commercial sector suffering as well? And are there programs for them to help them get on the feet? Because I do feel that there are other businesses that are hurting, and because it not only affects tourism-related businesses, but other types of business. So have you seen that demand or that need in other types of business that would need those kind of services?
Definitely. So obviously tourism will be at the front, right?
Yes.
As well as businesses that would have relied on tourism, whether it is retailers that would have depended on either stayover and or cruise. So you'll have your large, or some portion of the larger retail outlets that, from what I was hearing last year, I think would have had some of the best numbers ever, right? Because at first people were going online and getting all of their Amazon, but then there seemed to be a little bit of an issue at customs, and then everybody did as we probably should do anyway, right? And shop local. And we saw that, some of the retail segment would have had a pretty good year. However, there are other segments within retail that would have been impacted by tourism that aren't doing as well. There are segments such as restaurants that we go into a restaurant as locals on a Friday and Saturday, and it looks full to us, and we think they're doing well, but it's dead on the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, depending on obviously which restaurant, and they're actually holding on by a thread, as an example. So anything that would have touched tourism, whether it's retail, in regards to selling of items to tourists, restaurants, and other like businesses as well. But my understanding is, and obviously only so much money can circulate from a government perspective, is that the Honorable Andre Ebanks's ministry as well has been looking at some of the other businesses that you wouldn't think of as traditional tourism, but have been impacted, to see how they can also help them. And the interesting thing is, a lot of times when you're speaking to businesses, they don't, and obviously those that need to will rely on government. But these businesses that have entrepreneurs, and they have been surviving, and in most cases thriving, really don't want government's help, right? And what they wanted was for borders to be open so that they could do what their business was meant to do and actually get back on its feet. So in September, after the premier would have had the press conference where he mentioned that they were thinking about not opening in October, and potentially it would be January before we were open, we as a chamber quickly put together a survey to send it out to our members to understand what their thoughts were about it. And at that point in time, 66% of the persons who were employers said that they didn't agree with the decision and we needed to open earlier. And 78% of the persons who answered who were employees said that they didn't agree with the decision and it needed to be opened earlier. So when you look at what industry was saying and what Chamber of Commerce businesses were saying, more so than government, we're going to need your help to stay open or for a business not to go under, which there is going to be some of that. They were more or less raising their hands and saying, you know what, we did what you said, we got vaccinated, the majority of our employees are vaccinated. We need the borders to open and open as safely as possible so that we can actually start to make a living as well. So obviously you take care and you have as least amount of risk when it comes to lives, and now help us with our livelihoods is what we heard.
Okay, I'm gonna switch the conversation a bit on you, Chamari. I know you're
No
wearing
problem, no problem.
you're wearing many hats, and I see that the president of the Chamber of Commerce is gonna be a tough job, or one with a lot of responsibilities going forward as we try to get the economy back on its feet. How are you preparing for that challenge?
So what I always do in any engagement, whether it's a job and or a board and or a volunteer type of organization, is understand the mission. Understand, obviously, before you join, you want to know what the values are to make sure you're aligned, and then look at what the goals are for that organization and or board, and what are your objectives, and have a good understanding within yourself as well as the people you're working with in regards to what success looks like, right? So that we manage expectations. And once we look at what success looks like and we can come to an agreement, then you can achieve anything. And I have found that that's your best way of actually achieving success. So when it comes to my chamber hat, we're actually at the point where I need to sit with the president. And obviously, broad strokes, I understand that the chamber is about advocacy for our small business, as well as all of the businesses within the Chamber of Commerce. We understand that some of the key pillars has to do with education, which my other hat that also aligns. It has to do with economic growth, but sustainable economic growth. It has to do with a healthy community, of which the business community needs to also be healthy as one portion, for there to be enough jobs for Caymanians to be able to partake in various jobs and careers. And obviously businesses thrive, Caymanians thrive, and you have an ecosystem that can coexist and move from strength to strength. So we're definitely going to look to see what those objectives are, what success looks like. And I haven't had that conversation, and we're going to have it within the next month to properly plan. However, that being said, I know at the end of the day, you don't want to bat for the fields, but yet you get struck out before you get to first base. And the thing that's going to be most important to small businesses are to get back open, to get back on their feet, and to get back to at least some type of normalcy in order to survive, for us to get to the other areas, because that's our membership has to be core first. So I know we're definitely going to be looking at business continuity and how we make it through the first 2 to 3 months as tourism is back, as borders are back, to get back to at least having a roadmap where our small businesses and medium businesses can have a view of, you know what, we won't have to close shop and we can actually be successful in this new Cayman. So that's obviously going to be the first. However, sitting with my education council hat on, we're looking at pathways, right, for our youth and pathways to success. And it doesn't always have to be through getting your 4-year degree and or your master's and or your doctorate. It's about ensuring that people have the tools necessary and understand the options from an early enough age to take advantage of what's available to them in order to find pathways. And I think the chamber can play a vital role by also understanding what's there in the job market, what's to come in the job market. And I know we have mentorship, but maybe we need to encourage and formulate a mechanism to get our entrepreneurs that are the businesses that have 5 employees into schools to, you know, help our youth to understand that you don't always have to think that you want to wear a shirt and tie and become a lawyer to be successful. Look at all of these young and old entrepreneurs who are successful with businesses and they're their own bosses. We should be teaching our children to become independent and to know their options to be entrepreneurs. And I think we have all of the entrepreneurs within the chamber. Let's figure out the mechanism to get them in front of our youth so that that's another pathway that we can see and understand and figure out how to help our children to be as successful as possible with being an entrepreneur as one of those key things. Because I don't think that's taught in school from a young enough age group for people to really grasp it and understand it and do what's necessary in order to achieve success in that area.
Actually, you touched on my next topic and our next question, and it was about entrepreneurs. Do you think that
Yes.
there's capacity in the Cayman economy for more entrepreneurs? And do you think entrepreneurs will get the support not only from the educational aspect, but from the financial aspect to get the funds needed to help them start their own businesses and get the support from the chamber? You know, yes, I would love to have a business, but if there's no capacity in the economy, if there's too much of salons or is there someone to give the guidance as to where I should put my energies? And so to answer the question, is there capacity in the economy for more local entrepreneurs?
I mean, I think so, right? And at the end of the day, where I sit, an entrepreneur really is when you have, from a marketing perspective, when you're able to have a vision and fill a need.
Yes.
And there will always be needs across the board in the Cayman Islands. And it's not about looking at what currently here, especially when it comes to technology and understanding where we're going globally. The fact that, but one, we need to excite our children from a young age to make sure that they're getting the knowledge they need from a STEM perspective, for instance, so that they can actually produce the products and or the businesses in the future that you and I, right, wouldn't even understand what's going to be here in the next 5 to 10 years. I think it was Henry Ford who has a great quote, because typically in marketing school, it's like, you ask your customer what they need to understand what they need in order to give them that service or to build that product for them. And that's the box that they put us in, back in the 90s, early 2000s. But as far back as Henry Ford had a quote that he said, if I asked my customer what they wanted, they would have told me a faster horse, right? So he said, at some point in time, you need to understand what the need is without your customer actually knowing it,
Yes.
and build that so that when they use it to get to point B, they're like, oh, I never knew I needed this, but I actually do need it.
Yes.
So to answer your question, there's so many Henry Fords out there, especially now in the digital age and in the age of the internet, that your reach is so easy and can also be not as expensive as back in the day when it was only traditional media and you needed big dollars to get in front of your customers.
Yes.
We can't even imagine what our children now at the age of 10, 11, and 12, if they get the tools and they get the education and they have the mindset, what they'll be able to develop and become entrepreneurs in the next 5, 7, 10, 12, 15 years. So yes, there is capacity. And Ralph, what I think is very interesting is that if we agree, and I haven't had the conversation as yet with the chamber, with the chamber directors and executive director. But if we agree that getting whatever it is, an additional 10, 15, 20% of our children at a young age to think about being an entrepreneur, and we agree to that, that's when you look at what the roadblocks are. And the roadblocks may be there aren't people who they see as themselves to understand that they did it and I can do it as well. So let's solve that by bringing them to the schools. Then the next roadblock may be, well, how do I get that starter kit to get the financing in order to get it done? So then that might lead to, well, can the chamber work with whatever, the development bank, with government, with banks? If you make this criteria, we will also have angel investors that will come in to help you get a start. But until we say it's important and we say what does success look like, right, Ralph? Success looks like we want out of a class of 30, by the age of 12, for 10 of them to say they want to be entrepreneurs.
Yes.
Okay, that's what we want. Now, how do we get them there? And then we plan for it. And then in a year's time, we test it and see. Raise your hand. How many people, what do you want to be when you grow up? And it was the same thing we did with House City. When we were going into schools at first, in classes of 40, and we said, how many of you want to be doctors or nurses? You may have had one or two. And after we did our Healthcare Explorers program, and we figured out all of the ages and gave them products in schools where they could see and get excited and understand that a pig's heart is the same as a human heart. And here is a little piggy, snort, snort. And this is what you can become. You go back into those classes today, and 15 and 20 out of 40 say they want to be in a medical school. When we looked at the number of students as a percentage that were going off from medical degrees, and this would have been 6-7 years ago, it was 8%. And we said, you know what? In 5 years, if we can get this to 15%, we would have been successful. Last year, we went back and looked at that number. You know what that number is now, Ralph, of students that are overseas in medical career paths? 21%.
Excellent.
Right? So it's understanding what you want, what the vision is. You put in the metrics, you put in the work, and then you always test it to make sure you're achieving. So I think if we agree and we put in the metrics, and then obviously we would come and talk to you knowing your background as well,
Yes.
Mr. Lewis, in order to finding those pathways and removing barriers so that we can have more entrepreneurs that are Caymanians in the future.
Yes, I appreciate them. Thank you for taking time out to explain that so so clearly. I know Mario had a question on education.
Yes.
I think he dropped out for a bit, but definitely, Mario, I think he's back. Yes.
Yeah, I was back. I was just
Yes.
looking at some stuff.
Shamari has a few more minutes with us, so we want to switch over to the education council role that he's playing. I think you have some questions for him there.
I do. I want to just go back to the area of Chamber of Commerce president, and also want to touch something on education council as well. But I want to give you a real life scenario now, Shamari. You're going to be president in January of Chamber of Commerce, and obviously we all have personal responsibility.
Yes.
If we're going to enforce and make sure that this whole reopening is going to work. So things like face masks and vaccinations and all that is important, but enforcement and prosecution is also very important. So, under the Labor Act, the employer can give an employee warnings if they refuse to wear masks at work. I mean, we have a mask mandate essentially under the COVID management regulations, and under Section 64, subsection 3 and 4 of the Labor Act, there's a requirement for safety, and employees have an obligation. Also under our Section 2 of the Constitution Bill of Rights, there's a whole question of right to life, and so the police can warn employers if you go into a workplace and people are not wearing a mask, because I'm seeing that all over where you go into workplaces, stores and whatnot, and some of the employees are not wearing their masks. So let me just ask you now, you're president in January and February, we reopened our economy, numbers are increasing. We still have community spread, but we're obviously trying to manage it through all of these, the protocols, the vaccination, the masking, the safety protocols, and isolation and quarantining and whatnot. And the Chamber of Commerce can sometimes be on jacket both sides, as they say, kind of riding the fence in terms of cracking down. But if government um, says, look, we need to have people do this, and they come to the chamber, because I know the number of businesses have signed this pledge to do certain things for reopening. But
Correct.
is the chamber under you as president in January going to be as tough as nails in this battle to say, look, whatever needs to be done that is legally correct, we're going to do it, and we're not going to be in jacket both sides. The chamber is going to be with government and with enforcing of the laws and regulations, and supporting prosecutions wherever you can as well, because otherwise we're going to have a problem if we're not on the same page. So that's a real life scenario for you. Just briefly touch on it. We don't have much time left, but
No, definitely. But I mean that to me is simple actually, in Mr. Ebanks. Whatever the law says, you must abide by, right? And if you don't agree with certain regs or protocols, then you should have the reasons why you don't agree with it and make your case. And if it's changed, it's changed. But if it isn't, it isn't. At the end of the day, the law is the law. Um, so if there are mass mandates that state you must wear in these certain businesses, then you must wear. And at the end of the day, we as the chamber have also stated, hand over heart, we want to reopen based on what our membership has said. However, here are the areas we would like you to touch on. And we understand in order to reopen as safely as possible, to limit transmission, mask mandates are important. And therefore, where the science actually supports it, I definitely would be in agreement. Now, if the science doesn't support it and we think it's too onerous and we want you to change, and here's the evidence why, and here's how other countries are doing and how they've fared, and we want to make that representation, that's different. But if the law doesn't change and the mandate is still there, we must abide by
right.
the law and the mandates.
Thank you. May I ask you another question? You mentioned in your discussion earlier about this cocktail, I think you called it, of I guess it's pharmaceuticals that is available or will be available. I know that in the UK there's this they give approval for this new antiviral
The
drug,
pill.
the pill,
Yes.
yeah. So you
Yes.
that's certainly a very good thing, a kind of game changer as well.
Mhm.
And so you're saying that you have that at Health City now? Is that what you said?
Not
Or
not the pill. So it's and I purposely didn't say the name because I don't have it in front of me, but it's the the monochloral cocktail,
right?
which
Okay,
is what it is that they're using in other countries unsuccessfully
right,
after you catch COVID. But I always like to tell people it's 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 the doctor coming in after you've been hit by the bullet, that is a world-renowned doctor to remove the bullet, but do you want the bullet going in, right? So
right,
your vaccination and everything else is your bulletproof vest. But if somehow the bullet gets through, then this is the cocktail you would use, which has been approved. And I know HSA is also going to be getting it in stock, so they'll have it as well. Health
that-
City will have it as well. But the good news about these tablets is that if it's approved in the UK, then hopefully shortly, through Public Health England, after they've gone through all the various tests, they may approve it here as well, and then we'd be able to gain access, and then also have another, portion of armor in our defense against COVID.
Is it monoclonal antibodies? Is that what it is?
Yes, there we go. See,
Okay, yeah,
you have it.
I did have it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Do you have an idea of the price?
That I do not have that off the top of my head, but I'll be able to get that for you. And once again, just because I don't know exactly how it's administered, I would then have to do my research to be able to have an intelligent conversation with you. But I promise you, I'll get you that information.
I have another question on the Education Council, because you're the chairman of Education Council, which is a very excellent appointment. I'm glad that you're there. I served on that years ago as well. Things were a lot more simple then, but still important. Now, the whole scholarship secretariat, which I believe is part of the Education Council, or very much a part of the strategy anyway. There's a situation, and you mentioned about pathways for young people and creating entrepreneurs and getting people ready for the world of work and for further education. What is your view as a new chairman in terms of the scholarship secretariat? I mean, one thing that I noticed is that a bit of a disjoint between scholarships and when people go off to the university, there seems to be no plan to monitor them and to steward them or shepherd them, and when they come back to give them job placement. I mean, what's your view in terms of more kind of joined up, cohesive approach for scholarships and succession planning?
Oh, definitely. So this is where I think both of my hats can actually work well. Chamber of Commerce as well as education with the Secretariat. And to your point, Mario, I recall when I was in college, and at that time it was Senora Jennifer, because she was my Spanish teacher back in middle school. But then she had, Mrs. Smith had moved over to this scholarship secretariat, whatever it was called back there. And then it was also Phil Jackson was in the, so he was, I guess, the case manager that I was corresponding with when I was in college, obviously with the scholarship dollars. And it was midstream because prior to me going to college, everybody was placed when they came back from government. But I guess we didn't have enough jobs, or I don't know what exactly happened. But like that last year before I came back, I got that, well, you better start looking for your own job because, we no longer do that, right? So I think I was perfectly positioned to get some of the type of assistance that would have led me in a pathway towards getting a job, but then also having the other half of when I had to figure out how to get that job when I came back home. And it actually led me to spending more time in the States and working in the States. I couldn't get a job back home off the bat. And to get that experience using that 1 year after college that you're allowed to work in the US, and then my employer even kept me on past that year to then come back after 2 years. So to answer your question, I think we need to get back there. And I think we need to have that engagement. And the secretariat that we have there now does work very hard. And I think they would be willing, once we're able to make those connections with the business community and the secretariat, to understand the students that are away, what they're studying, what their interests are. So even when they come back, let's set up those internships in the private sector, because the way we as the Department of Tourism used to get our next employee was by having as many interns as possible. And you want to know why? Of the 20 interns we have, there are 10 of them. And guess what? May not be ready to come and work at Department of Tourism, but we know that, right?
Yes.
And then there are 10, by the way they work every time they come to intern, we know these are the 10 that we want to come back. And the interesting part is, a good portion of the 10, that the only reason we hired them is because we know how they work, didn't interview that well.
Yeah.
So that means if we were just leaving it to the interview, we would have missed out on some of the brightest sparks that would have done the best work for Department of Tourism. And I think we need to get back there, business community, working with education and making sure that, yes, you have those pathways, but you connect those dots.
And tying it in with work, immigration, work with the staffing plans, with the schools, with the universities. Because in before your time, you mentioned that people, when they got scholarships, they also were bonded to come back to work. And as a result of that, they were monitored closer so that when they came back, they had a job. But they made a decision that they say, well, we don't have jobs for them, so they have to hunt for themselves. And that's where I think you're right, that the system kind of went downhill, and there's not any kind of, it got very loose. And And so I'm happy to hear that you're looking at that, because there's definitely a need for a more joined up system, and a more system that is more disciplined and accountable. As it is now, is almost like a free for all, and there's millions of dollars being invested in scholarships. We got to make sure we get the biggest bang for our people out of it. So good luck with that. And I think your chamber, business community, and your marketing um, disciplines and competencies will work very good together on that. I do have another question in
Yes.
relation to cultural sensitivity. And this, I guess, from your Chamber of Commerce role, but also from your role at Health City, cultural sensitivity for incoming new employees into the Cayman Islands. I mean, I know in the case of Health City, you got a tremendous demographic of Indian people, but do you have a cultural sensitivity program at the hospital? And would you be supportive as Chamber of Commerce president and a very talented young man to put or to advocate for something like that in the country, to bring about a cultural awareness, tranquility, both ways between Caymanians and non-Caymanians?
Definitely. So we and then with my previous hat on at Health City, we were able to, and not so much sensitivity at different levels, but cultural immersion by working with the Department of Tourism and their Pride program that they would have for tourism workers. We were able to get that Pride program constituted for our employees coming in so they could learn about the island, learn about the culture, learn about what it is to be within the Cayman Islands. But I definitely think, especially as we as the Cayman Islands continue to import labor, which is what's happening, that we need to, and as the society seems to have become more segregated in certain aspects. Previously, we didn't need to have it because persons were infused, and it started at the school level too, Mr. Ebanks,
Yes.
where you would have, I can think back to when I was in school, and even I still recall NAT after primary school, that those results would come out. And of the top 20 students, 16 used to be from the government primary schools, right?
Mm.
But we used to go into middle school, and it would be a melting pot of everybody would be there into high school, have English friends, have, Pakistani friends and the such. And that immersion used to happen at school, and then sporting clubs outside of school. But as we have become a little more segregated, I think from an educational standpoint, we've lost some of that. So if we need to strategically plan to put that back in legislatively through cultural immersion, and that's a way to get us back into that, I think we should do it. And I'll definitely be reaching out to you to see your thoughts on that, knowing that that's in your wheelhouse as well. Because we as a country, I think, need to get back to that, and we need to respect Caymanian norms and cultures. And everybody should know what it is to be Caymanian, even if you're not Caymanian, if you're planning to live here.
Yes.
Shamari, I have a question.
Yes.
Are you very good at solving jigsaw puzzles?
My son is.
and the reason for that question is that somehow you have gotten all the pieces together for this pandemic. You're in the right place at the right time. For example, you're going to be the president of the Chamber of Commerce and chair of the Education Council, and it's a great fit. And definitely, you have so much knowledge that you can put together, not only with these areas, but in other areas. And I look forward to having a further discussion with you, about, we could sit here all night and we could talk about so many things, but I do think that the puzzles you put that together so well, the pieces are fitting, and you have a serious task ahead of you. But with the background and with the heart that you have, I think that you're in a good position. And I wish you all success as the new chair president, Chamber of Commerce president. And what I like about that specifically is that there's a focus on small business. I must say that I thought that they were left out at one point. And but it's good to hear that you and the others believe that they're very important, particularly now, as you know, small business is the nucleus of the economy. And so therefore, with that focus on small business, trying to get them going, helping them, it only benefits everyone, including the big business too. And so it's so heartwarming to hear this tonight. Um,
And
we're just about,
and
sorry,
Mr.
go right
Lewis,
ahead.
just to mention that a lot of times that I don't want people to put it out there like I'm Superman, right? Um, the God has blessed me to always have great teams, and what I always look to do is continue to have intelligent, hardworking people around you that align
Yes.
with a vision perspective, and they're really the people who make it work, and then they push me to go talk about it, right? So just saying that we have a great team at Chamber and a great admin team, Education Council. They have so many different bodies, and the minister actually is the one with the vision that's going to allow us to achieve a lot of this. So, hats off to the minister who took on education again when that typically at times is the ministry that people may not want, but she wanted it to make sure that at the end of her tenure she would get some of her plans to come through to fruition. So just definitely want to thank her as well. And even at Health City, I am there, but I am just there as one small part, and it's really the doctors and the CEO and the nurses and the great vision of the Dr. Devi Shetty that has gotten us to where we are. And even in working with the HSA, that's hand in glove, so that yes, there are things that need to be worked out, but when it comes down to it, from a preparedness perspective, at the highest level for the pandemic, they're ready. And it's great partnerships like that that's going to help us as the Cayman Islands to continue to thrive.
Thank you. Mary, do you have any final words for
I,
Shamari?
I do have a final question for him very quickly. Shamari, as a
Yes.
father of young children, yourself, the CDC or FDA, one of them in the US, I think yesterday or today, approved vaccines for children, for young children. Give us in 45 seconds your words of wisdom in regard to your thoughts on that, and if Cayman reassuring parents about vaccination of children.
So that one's going to be interesting for me because the evidence for me is quite clear for adults and the most vulnerable in regards to health issues. When it comes to children, even within my 3 children, I'm not sure that I would vaccinate all of them. There is one of my children that has issues with asthma that obviously I'm talking about this without having agreement with my wife. You know how that goes, Mr.
Yeah.
Eubanks and Mr. Lewis. But we have been having conversation, and there's definitely one of the 3 that off the bat we would vaccinate, just based on the ailment that he has. Um, However, the other 2 we would have to give some thought to it. We'd have to look at the evidence at that point in time. My understanding is Public Health England isn't going to necessarily approve it before probably mid next year, is what I'm made to understand. So we still have time to, and the benefit of understanding the information behind it. But if today I needed to do it, I would do one of 3 today if needed. Just understanding that it doesn't impact children as much. And however, one of my children has underlying issues from a breathing perspective, which is what Delta goes after. So we'd definitely vaccinate him to protect him as much as possible.
I'm sorry to put you in a spot. I hope Michelle doesn't.
Yeah, don't worry, she's gonna come look for you.
But the reason I asked the question is
Yes.
because you're very learned and very wise. So I want your perspective. So thank you very much for being honest with us.
Definitely.
Ralph, I have another comment at the end, but I give back to you.
Okay, well, Shamari, I want to say thank you very much. You spent quite a bit of time
thank you.
with us, and you've educated all our viewers, our listeners, even myself, Mario. And I want to invite you back in the future because you're going to have your hands full, and we want to take some of that load off your heads, especially with the communication side of it. Yes,
definitely. Thank you both, and thank you for being such gracious hosts. And just to say that I respect both of you and your different skill sets, and I look up to gentlemen like you, and you all have done a great thing for persons who are young Caymanians to look forward of how people should carry themselves and how to be successful in various areas. And I can only hope to be like you 2 gentlemen in the future as well, and be sitting on a panel and having younger persons, because you 2 are still young. I'm still young, right? To have a conversation with. But thank you
You're
both.
Okay,
you're
thank
very
you.
kind.
Good night.
You're
Okay,
you're
all
very
right.
kind. Thank you so much.
Okay, good.
Uh,
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Good night.
Ralph, I just want to end by saying to you that, and to our viewers, that Dr. Roy is not here tonight, but he'll be here next week. And I just want to end by, there are people out there who are very fearful and spreading rumors and whatnot. And I want to end by this. It says the absence of fear is not courage. It may bring peace, but not progress. Courage is moving through fear, doing something in spite of it. John Wayne, who was a country and western star, said, courage is being scared to death, but saddling up anyway. So let's saddle up and let's move forward. Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you. And thank you for watching the panel one more time. Join us next week, Thursday at 8 p.m. for another chart setting event. And good night. Have a great night and God bless. Stay safe and watch out for those COVID. Good night.